Hello, you beautiful people. Today we are back with another waiver wire must rosters. Apology for the late upload. This is for week 5. I meant to post this last night, but I got distracted and got doing things. Anyways, not important. Today we're back. You're going to talk about some guys that I think absolutely belong on a roster this week. So we'll just go ahead and get started with the must roster for shallow leagues. So this is, your 8 to 10 team and above. And then we have some guys for, the more deeper leagues. This is like your 12 team, the 14 team and above guys. So these are the shallow guys, like I said. First off on my list is Killian Hayes. And I think the only reason that could possibly happen, this could possibly be a waiver wire pickup, is because Cade Cunningham is set to miss the next week. And don't get me wrong, I think Killian Hayes is ass in real life right now. I don't think he is good enough to be to getting like NBA minutes. But I mean, while Cade Cunningham's out, he's their de facto point guard. Corey Joseph has been questionable as well. And the past 2 games, I mean, he's had 7 assists in both of them, 6 rebounds, 3 steals in one of them, and he put up over 10 points. So I mean, if we're looking at his outlook for the next week, I expect him to average over 30 fantasy points per game, and that's just not really something you can leave on a waiver wire in like a 10 team and above league. He definitely should be rostered this week. After Cade comes back, immediately drop him and never touch him again unless Cade, misses like an extended period of time. But yeah, that is, like I mentioned, the only way that you should ever pick up Killian Hayes is if Cade goes down. Other than that, there's really just not a lot of fantasy upside. But in this week, I think he absolutely belongs on a roster, so I definitely recommend picking him up. Moving on, next up on my list, another guy, very situational, Chris Boucher. I think for this week, he is a great pickup. If we look at the Raptors roster, we all know they're missing Pascal. They've been missing Fred VanVleet. He's been missing a few games right now, and we've seen Chris Boucher's minutes sort of skyrocket because of it. He had 31 against OKC and 28 on the 12th against Indiana, and he put up 20 points and 19 points respectively. Again, similar to Killian Hayes, when Chris Boucher gets minutes, he does produce. It's just the fact that, most of the season he'll only get around 15 per game. I mean, maybe like 20 per game if they're really hurting for injuries in the Raptors front court. But yeah, this season, again, I'm expecting at least 30 fantasy points out of him. Definitely wouldn't want to leave him on a roster. He is rostered in about 47% of leagues, so he's probably not on a lot of waiver wires. But if he is for some reason on your waiver wire in like an 8 or a 10 team league still, I would definitely recommend picking him up for this week. Then moving on, we have Cameron Payne. This one is very conditional. The Suns do play tonight against Miami. Chris Paul is still listed as day-to-day, and it is absolutely worth monitoring his status because if Chris Paul's playing, Cam Payne pretty much becomes a drop. But if Chris Paul is going to miss additional time, he's still questionable as of the time I'm recording this. If he does end up missing the game, you're probably going to get like 35 fantasy points at a campaign. So I think he is an absolute must stream tonight. I've picked him up in most leagues that I'm in, that he's still available on the waiver wires because, last 2 games he had 20 points, had 8 assists against Minnesota, 4 against Orlando, and put up 52 and 35 fantasy points respectively. So absolutely Cam Payne is a must roster for this week. If he's not on a roster right now, I would pause this video and go pick him up. I mean, barring the news of CP3, of course. And then moving on, this one, no secret, he's been the talk of a lot of other people's videos. A lot of people in my Discord have been talking about him. And it's Poku. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because people have been getting salty at me for butchering people's names. I don't really care that much, guys. It's not that serious. But anyways, Poku's had seen some elevated production as of late. He's on a pretty good stretch. I mean, he had a 47 fantasy point game, a 32, a 28. And his minutes have kind of been all over the place. He had 39 against Milwaukee, 23 against Toronto, and then 18 against New York. So the Thunder's rotation has been a bit hard to read so far this season, but when Poku is producing, he does have the potential to grab a decent amount of boards, a few assists here and there, and pairing that with, getting a lot of opportunity on the OKC Thunder, I think it is absolutely worth rostering him for this week. He's rostered in about 15% of leagues, but if I'm in like a 10 or a 12 team league, I'm definitely considering picking up Poku for this week. I think he should be on a roster, and I definitely would want to leave him on a waiver wire for someone else. And then the last player I want to talk about, this is, again, all these players are very situational specifically for this week for the most part. I don't see too many long-term ads coming out of this, but it's going to be Thaddeus Johnson or Thad Young. Absolute legend. He's only rostered in about 1.5% of leagues, but honestly, I would roster him in all the way up to like a 12-team league, maybe even a 10-team league. You could talk me into it if all the other guys on this list are taken. Because when he gets the minutes for Toronto, he always does produce, and he got 34 against Indiana. He's probably going to see a very elevated number of minutes, again, with Pascal being out and Fred VanVleet still listed as questionable. I would definitely recommend picking him up. If you're in a deeper league, like a 14-team league, absolutely pick up Thad Young. I think he's a must roster, absolutely, for 12 to 14 team and above. But yeah, it's mainly just the minutes, man. When Thad Young gets minutes, he's going to produce. It's just a question of whether he's going to get them. And I'm pretty confident he's going to be getting them this week just because, like I mentioned, the Raptors have been missing Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and, guys like Chris Boucher and Thaddeus Johnson are the ones that are going to be stepping up into position. And also, I mean, if we're looking at their other injuries, they are missing Gary Trent Jr. as well and Precious Achiuwa, which I should have mentioned earlier but forgot to. But Yeah, so it's pretty much like Scotty Barnes, OG, Chris Boucher, Thad Young getting a heavy dose of minutes this week would be my imagination. It would be my estimation, excuse me. So yeah, definitely monitor the Raptors, like, their statuses up for the health of the players that are listed as out, but it looks like a lot of them are going to be missing at least today's game. So yeah, definitely pick them up for tonight while there's still time. Again, sorry for the late upload, but whatever. Next, we'll go ahead and get into the must roster for the deeper leagues. All right, so next up, these are my guys for deeper leagues. Again, I would roster any of the guys I've already mentioned above these guys, but for the time being, these are guys that aren't rostered in that high a percentage of leagues, so they're probably more likely to be on your waiver wires. But first up is Gabe Vincent. I mean, if we're looking at the Miami Heat, the last 7 days he's been averaging around 27 fantasy points. I mean, on the season he's only at 19, so this is a significant improvement. And the only reason why is, Tyler Hero's been out, Victor Oladipo's out. Gabe Vincent sort of picked up the slack in terms of the minutes. He's been getting around 35 minutes per game the last 7 days. If someone's going to play that many minutes and have like the talent that Gabe Vincent does, I almost called him Vincent. That's the New Brunswick Canadian coming out of me. But yeah, I just think it is worth picking him up. I mean, if we look at his recent 4 games, 33 fantasy points, 27, 21, 32. If you can get a guy off waivers, he's only rostered in about 2.5% of leagues right now. If you can pick him up and he gives you, a high 20s for fantasy points or like even a low 30s, that's great for like a 14-team league and above. So definitely consider picking up Gabe Vincent, at least until Heroes comes back. I think it's absolutely worth taking a look at and picking him up in the deep league. Moving up next, we got Edmund Sumner from the Brooklyn Nets. Again, very conditional. Obviously, we got to wait for Kyrie Irving to get back. But until then, Sumner has been their starting point guard. He's got 26 minutes last night against the Lakers, 23 against the Clippers, and he had 19 against New York. But if we look at his fantasy numbers, they're nothing stellar, but he's getting a few steals here and there. The minutes are there. He's getting around 22 minutes on the last 7 days, putting up 12 points per game. I think it is worth taking a flyer on in deeper league if there's not too many good streaming options, just because he is getting the minutes, he's getting the shot attempts and stuff like that. Definitely worth a flyer on him, in my opinion, because he has the potential of giving you a very high percentage shooting night, giving you 39 fantasy points like he had against New York. Personally, if he's on waivers and I'm in a deep league, he's not even rostered in 1% of leagues right now. So if you're in a very deep league, like a 16-teamer or something, definitely recommend picking up Sumner. Moving on next, we got Charles Bassey. Hopefully I'm not butchering that name, from the San Antonio Spurs. He's been playing pretty solid in limited minutes. That's the only reason I don't have him higher on my list, is because he's only been getting around 16 minutes a game. But even with that limited sort of run, he has put up some pretty solid fantasy numbers. He had 39 fantasy points against Milwaukee. He had 35 against Memphis. And while he's been contributing a lot in the stocks category, that's definitely not sustainable. He had 4 blocks against Milwaukee. It is worth, picking him up on a flyer. He's only rostered in about 5% of leagues right now. I think I would definitely take advantage, take a look, and roster him if I could. While the runtime is concerning, if he's going to produce like this, you can't really leave him on the waiver wire. He's been averaging around 30 fantasy points per game the last 7 days, so definitely consider taking a look at Charles Bassey. Then moving on to the next one, we got Kenyon Martin Jr. from the Houston Rockets. He's someone that, again, the minutes are the main cause for concern with him. He's not someone that is going to get a ton of minutes, and I've seen some people debating whether the Houston Rockets are actually that guard heavy in how they play. Me personally, when I watch them, they're so guard dominated. The other people on the team really don't get that much of an opportunity to create or even run the offense and stuff like that. But they are missing, Jayshawn Tate's still out, Bruno Fernando's still out. Kenyon Martin Jr. the last 7 days has been averaging around 30 fantasy points per game. He's been getting around 25 minutes. He's just an explosive athlete. He's going to get high percentage looks at the rim, a lot of dunks, a lot of good block shots. Past 4 games, he's had 2 block shots in 2 of them. So yeah, just looking at the recent fantasy numbers, I think it's pretty clear as to why I consider him a must roster. The only reason he is lower on the list than the other guys is because I assumed he might already be rostered, and I was being dumb when I made the list. But I would definitely roster him over Bassey and Sumner. So I would roster Gabe Vincent, then Kenyon Martin, Sumner, Bassey, and then the last guy on my list. But yeah, just focusing on Kenyon Martin, I don't have too much to say. He's getting around 25 minutes per game, averaging around 15 points per game last 7 days, 5.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.3 blocks. I think that's absolutely worth a roster spot, especially in a deep league. So yeah. And then lastly on my list, this guy is very conditional, and if John Morant does end up missing an extended period of time, he shoots all the way up to an ad for the shallow leagues. I would roster him in about every league format if John Morant's missing, because whenever Tyus Jones gets the minutes, he always puts up very solid fantasy numbers. He's one of the best backup point guards in the league. Last game against Washington yesterday with no John Morant, he put up 35 fantasy points on 17, 3, and 5 with 3 steals. I'm a huge fan of Tyus Jones' game. I really think he is capable of like running a team here and there whenever John Morant goes out, as is evidenced by, their record from last season. Whenever John Morant missed time, Tyus Jones was running the point guard, and he was doing a very solid job. So I would definitely recommend monitoring John Morant's situation. If it does look like he's going to be missing an extended period of time, Tyus Jones becomes an absolute must roster. I would roster him over like every single other person that I've mentioned so far in this video, honestly, for like a one-night stream. But yeah, so definitely monitor that. But like I said, I only put him on the end here because, John Morant might be back next game. It's hard to tell right now. We don't really know his status. So like I said before, just monitor the injury status of the players on the teams that I've mentioned and then kind of go from there. So that's going to wrap up the waiver wire must rosters for this week. Let me know if you have any players that you think I should add to this list or that you think people should absolutely be rostering in their fantasy leagues for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this helps you guys out. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.